Hello there, welcome. It's Digital Foundry Direct Weekly. It's the 191st edition. We're closing in on the big 200. Of course, this is our weekly show discussing the latest gaming and technology news. Plenty to get on with, so let's get straight to the panel. John Linneman, hi.
Hey Rich, are you bringing the boom today?
No. Alex Battaglia, hello.
I got a boom mic. I don't know if that counts.
Yeah, I should say every week we have a content meeting and Alex has a particular camera setup where we don't really see Alex, we just see this massive boom arm, which is quite
That's
amusing.
True.
Anyway, let's crack on with the first news topic. But before that, a quick shout out once again to store.digitalfoundry.net. Apparently there's some sort of Thanksgiving thing going on where you have to give away all your stuff for nothing. So yes, we have a Black Friday sale going on with the DF store. So please do check that out. Up to 50% off, according to Will's message here, apart from the DF Fighters mouse mat, because we don't make any money on that at all anyway, turns out. But it is awesome, so do check that out. Okay, well, let's move on to our first news topic. So the big story of the week, which is obviously the lead story, is a report from Bloomberg stating that Sony is working on a PlayStation Handheld. And apparently it's not going to be coming for a few years, which is oddly reminiscent of what we're hearing from Microsoft, who's been perfectly clear about its intentions in the portable space. There's a few things about this which may be lost in translation. There's talk that it's going to support PlayStation 5 games. We'll talk about that in a moment. But John, this is happening, isn't it? It's just a matter of time.
I would say so. The thing is the handheld space has changed, right? First of all, the Switch has taken over. It's been very successful. Secondly, the last time Sony tried a handheld, we were in the midst of like the smartphone revolution for gaming. That's sort of all settled now, and like smartphone gaming is just a thing, but it's also kind of its own thing, and it kind of coexists, I think. And also, you know, we were at a point where handheld technology simply couldn't really come anywhere near running the kind of stuff you would make for a high-end PC or home console, right? So like that was like Vita 3DS days. So obviously what the Switch did was it allowed Nintendo to consolidate all their resources behind a single device that could do both. And I'd imagine both Sony and Microsoft are looking at ways that they could leverage a similar sort of, design where they essentially create a single game and then it can run on both hardware. How feasible this is all going to be, how it's all going to shake out, there's a lot of questions there, especially if they're going for high-end graphics. But then you see something like what Microsoft's already doing with Series S and knowing how scalable modern games are. You kind of see how it could work. But what's interesting about this is we actually heard about this handheld some months ago from a couple sources specifically. So we're not in the business of leaking things, but it's interesting that this finally sort of started to make its rounds, because it just sort of confirmed what we had seen and heard off the record about this existing, which is cool. So to me, this sort of just strengthens the notion that, yeah, they're very much working on something. And this article makes it seem like it's even further out than I actually thought based on that. So I'm not sure where it's going. I think there's like prototype stuff out there, possibly. There's still a lot of questions for this, but it does feel like this future of offering a handheld and a home console option is very likely at this point.
Mm-hmm. We've got this question from SJ33 in brackets, Jake. Hi, Jake.
Hi, Jake.
Hi. And I'll come to you, Alex, directly after the question. Hi, all. That Sony handheld seems too good to be true. How are they going to get a handheld with a low enough TDP to play PS5 games within that time frame, given they're still not able to make a truly slim PS5 console? Assuming this is not another silly streaming thing, this is going to have to play PS5 games natively with the expected compatibility and performance. It's not like PC handhelds, where performance optimization can be left to the end user. Will we see special handheld modes added along with a list of a whitelist of compatible titles, or am I underestimating AMD's ability to shrink the PlayStation 5 silicon? You're not underestimating AMD's ability to shrink the PlayStation 5 silicon. There's no way a device that chews through 200 watts right now is going to suddenly do the same results at 20 watts a couple of years down the road. It's just not happening. So, what we're sort of seeing in that story about the ability to run PlayStation 5 games, it's not going to happen. What I see happening is very much what John suggests, which is basically scalability and almost like the Switch model. We're already seeing scaling up with PS5 Pro. There's absolutely no reason why you couldn't scale down. And if you think about the architectural leanings of the PS5 Pro and where things are heading in future console designs, we're going to see it with Switch 2, basically better ray tracing, machine learning capabilities. It'll be the same here. I don't know what you think about all of this, Alex, but I'm quite excited about the idea of a PlayStation handheld because historically they've just made really good ones. But curious what you think about this one.
Yeah, I think it's a different situation than what Microsoft will have with its handheld, because Microsoft, other than leaning into the whole PC mentality thing, where maybe Jake mentions this too, like you can configure the options in a game based upon a PC version to maybe make it run on a low powered device. And that can be like semi-successful depending upon the device. But Microsoft also has the ability, depending upon how they do it, to lean into Xbox Series S profiles for games, which typically run at depending on the game, 720p to 1080p resolution or even lower, obviously. Typically run at half the frame rate, typically do not have the ray tracing options that are there on the Series X, if they are there. And they can technically lean into those profiles for a handheld for backwards compatibility purposes. I don't know if they're going to do that. But Sony never had an Xbox Series S, which forced developers to make these low-end profiles for games. And in which case, if they bring out a handheld, I think it would be almost like a Sony VR2, where it would have to have its own versions of games after the fact, after it came out, or via patches after it came out, when it came into existence. So it'd be like a new lower end PS5 in that aspect, that is mobile, and it doesn't have the full BC catalog, maybe other than PS4 games. But like the original PS5 titles and a lot of those other things that didn't have PS4 games, they would either be forced into have, like, I don't know. I don't think they couldn't do it like Microsoft could potentially do it. And I think that it depends upon the consumer there, how much you care about that. But, I think a lot of people would be pretty happy even if they didn't get all the PS5 titles, if they got like PS4 BC on it, backwards compatibility. I think that would still be an incredible, it would look incredible. PS4 games still look great. So, I think that's where it could be.
Absolutely. Another area that I was thinking of was like if they could just make the quintessential PlayStation experience in a handheld, where you mentioned PS4 backwards compatibility. Not saying they'll do this, but what if they push this idea of this is a handheld. We've got PS1, PS2, PSP, we've got Vita, we've got PS3 maybe, PS4. All this stuff can be played on this handheld, and obviously they'd have to set up the whole digital storefront thing and go that way because you couldn't use original media. But I think it would be cool if they could actually do a device that was capable of all those different types of software, all that different type of software, in addition to running sort of like special PS5 versions of games. Because like you say, obviously I don't think they could just have it natively run PS5 games as they are. Just no way.
There's not really any point either. I mean, let's say you've got a handheld, 7-8 inch screen, right? Why do you need it outputting 4K? Right. 7 to 8 inch screen. So it's just sort of like basic, logic that says that you're not going to be running native PlayStation 5 games on it from a technological perspective. And also, if you're thinking about battery life, let's run a 4K game on a handheld under battery. It's kind of nuts. So it's a bit sort of weird to see that coming into the conversation at all in that original report. But in terms of running native PlayStation 5 code, sure, right? It will, you'd think it would still have a Radeon GPU. It would still have x86 processor cores. That would kind of make sense. Although that said, if it's going to be quote unquote bespoke, similar to what we saw with PlayStation Vita, there's no reason why they couldn't move to ARM if that is the best CPU choice for the platform. So yeah, I mean, PlayStation 4 compatibility, that would require x86, and that kind of makes a bit more sense, I think, to run those games natively because they were targeting a 1080p screen at the time. And there's no reason why that wouldn't map quite nicely onto like an 8-inch screen, similar to what the PlayStation Portal is doing. It's an 8-inch 1080p screen. The compatibility side of things, though, I'm just trying to think of how that would work. 1.6 gigahertz CPU, that's eminently doable on a handheld. 800 megahertz GPU, eminently doable on a handheld. 18 compute units, I'd say probably, if this is a few years out, eminently doable on a handheld. So yeah, I mean, PlayStation 4 is possible. It's just kind of like the power and the bandwidth that's a bit more problematic there. But I'd say it's doable based on what we're seeing with the recent AMD APUs. So yeah, that's quite interesting. But I noticed that, all of these machines, well, the Microsoft and the Sony ones specifically, are a few years out. And that's really interesting language because in theory, certainly if you're Microsoft, for example, Valve is making headway with the Steam Deck. They're selling millions of units there now. Not many, many millions, but millions. And I'm surprised that they're not looking to do something sooner, because I can just see Valve gaining more of a foothold, both in terms of handhelds and basically laying the groundwork for a Steam console if they wanted to get one out. So the time lag there is interesting, and I can only assume that they've done the maths in terms of future process nodes and Radeon GPUs, and they've come to the conclusion that to provide a meaningful upgrade over what Steam Deck is doing, and I mean meaningful, then you're going to have to wait that long. I mean, I'm looking at the moment. I don't really think you can see it here. Actually, it's in the background here. There we go. This is a little mini PC that I've got, B-Link SER9, which is using the Strix Point AMD APU. That thing's a monster. It's got 12 CPU cores, an MPU. I think it's got 16 compute units, but it's still, yes, it's a lot faster than the Steam Deck, but it's not twice as fast, so right. That's just how, we're seeing iterative bumps upon iterative bumps, not sort of game-changing performance changes. So yeah, we are probably some years out before we can actually see a meaningful upgrade over Steam Deck, which is probably why we're waiting years for these handhelds to come along. But even so.
One other thing, Rich, is we're talking about this whole PS5 situation, but let's say this thing comes out 3 or 4 years from now, that's pretty much end of life for PS5.
Yeah.
Right?
And we know that we're going to be seeing a complete, radical overhaul in terms of architecture, simply to make an affordable device at that point.
Right.
There's a lot of talk about UDNA, which is machine learning and GPU compute coming together in I assume some sort of unified architecture. Which possibly makes sense for a console at that point. But yes, you're quite right. I would expect a handheld to be based on the newer architectural designs, simply to make those new games compatible with the handheld, which I think is kind of required at that point. Absolutely. Yeah. Any other points to raise about this handheld? Obviously, it's speculative, but we do think it's happening. And we now know from this Bloomberg report, assuming it checks out, that it is some years away. But I do like the idea, what you were saying, John, about some sort of PlayStation universe, so to speak, on a handheld. Yeah. But there's no reason why that couldn't apply to the whole
No,
ecosystem.
they
really.
could have done that any point. And they just, whatever.
Yeah.
They don't really seem that interested in it, but I still think it would be a very strong selling point for them.
The issue is always going to be the PlayStation 3.
It's always the PS3. Gosh darn it.
The triple's too powerful.
It was too powerful. The cell, man. They could put a cell in there, though. Maybe it's time to bring it back.
Oh my goodness, no.
Okay, so PlayStation Handheld.
One last thing about that, though. What do you all think about the current state of like handheld sizes?
Oh wow.
Because I feel
Well, they're
like
getting bigger.
they're already huge and they're getting bigger.
Yes.
Like they make the Atari Lynx look like dainty, quite frankly.
Yeah, really.
Which is, it's just shocking at this point. And I'm wondering, do you all miss the smaller ones, the ones that you could easily toss in a bag? Because I've been playing with my original, the PSP lately, and it's been awesome again. Like just, it's so small and lightweight, and there's just something about it that just feels really great and portable in a way that like a Steam Deck or the
Never
Switch
feels.
absolutely do not. You know what I mean?
It's not the thing where you can, like with a Game Boy Advance SP, where you can literally put it in a back pocket of a pant.
Exactly.
Nothing like that. I mean, I would love that, but it just doesn't fit with like the way people are
I
doing
agree.
these things anymore, sadly.
Yeah, I mean, there was news this week that Tencent, of all people, is putting out a handheld.
Right.
Except it's got an 11-inch 3D screen.
Oh no!
Yeah, it's based on it's based on an Intel chipset, a massive 11-inch display, even larger than the Legion Go, which is already quite colossal.
We're talking about
I think the problem is that the way things are going in terms of silicon, if you want to get sort of like the best balance of price and performance, you have to push the silicon harder, which means you need to feed it more power, which means you need a bigger display, which a bigger form factor rather, which means you get a bigger display and a larger handheld. Yeah, and I think even when the Switch came along, it was slightly larger than was kind of expected, and the new Switch seemingly is going to be larger still.
Well,
So-
Rich, if you're worried about power consumption and stuff, maybe electric cars are becoming popular. Like, let's say you just use like an electric car charger for your handheld. It's all good.
It's
Yeah,
mobile
I'm
at
sure
that
I
point,
need-
right? It's got wheels.
I'm not sure I need 7 kilowatts going into my handheld. That's what my power. That would be funny though.
Just like clonk it onto the back there, and you're like, yeah, we're good now.
That'd be awesome, especially as mine is basically in the parking area, so I'd have to be gaming, literally sitting outside my house.
There are worse things.
Wow. We're going out there with this particular discussion. Maybe we should draw it to a close and move on to the next news topic. Okay, so this one, quote unquote, dropped yesterday. So we haven't had a huge amount of time to look at it, but some might say that we don't really need a huge amount of time to look at it. Avatar Frontiers of Pandora, which is an absolutely beautiful game, has now been I was going to say upgraded, but I'm not sure it's the right word. A patch has come out for Avatar Frontiers of Pandora on the PlayStation 5 Professional. What it does is to bump up settings to the quality mode level, and it runs at 60 frames per second. It was 30 and 40 on the base unit. And it uses a dynamic resolution range between 720p and 1800p, I understand. And it uses PSSR for upscaling up to 4K. Now, I loaded up the patch yesterday, and the first thing I noticed was basically this. So you're sort of panning around on, this is literally entering a save point that I had. You sort of pan around, and there were issues. Alex, what did you make of what I've shared with you so far? It's not good, is it?
No, it is not good. And it follows the exact same kind of pattern that we saw with a number of other games that got PS5 Pro patches, where I wonder, like, after the patch was implemented, how many eyes just looked at this subjectively and said, this is worth it. And
the sort of flickering shadows, and there's something really odd going on there. And obviously the foliage side of things, the shimmer on foliage, which does seem to be a PSSR issue at this point.
It is, yeah. Which I think is related to the fact that the foliage there is lit via their GI. So like indirect lighting, specularity, as in reflections, don't seem to go really well with PSSR at these presumably lower internal resolutions, especially in these titles from Massive for some whatever reason. And my goodness, it's just not good looking. I think in a case like this where, you just sit still and you can see all the shimmer, even without not rotating the camera, like you also sent me a video of it, Rich, where I think, I mean, FSR in this game wasn't great. And I think that was one of the things that we said wasn't so awesome, was like the performance mode image quality. I thought it looked really, really rough, actually. Low resolutions FSR, right? But here it's also artifacting in a different way than FSR. So it's like you're trading artifacts in a way, and it's not a great always upgrade that you'd expect. And I think this is an issue of options as well as a bit of managerial oversight to say that this is like the way you should do a patch. It shouldn't look worse in some aspect is the main thing. But the thing is, if it does happen to look worse for some reason, there should still be the choice for the user to run maybe the old modes from base PS5, which I think is now the new sentiment out there. And John showed it off really well in the GT7 video, where PSSR there wasn't like a straight win, right? So, and it had its own issues. Nope. So being able to turn it off and run different modes, maybe even legacy modes, is I think the way forward until PSSR gets better. And I think, I don't know who's responsible for that. It's probably the people who make the game, but it's a pretty different situation to when DLSS came out, because you can always turn off DLSS. You can always turn off FSR, right? And run native if you wish. But here the user doesn't get that choice. And I think the choice is the key problem, actually.
Yeah, I mean, first thing I did when I booted the game was to look at the options, because Avatar had a pretty comprehensive selection on the base PlayStation 5. You had your 30 FPS quality mode, you had your 40 FPS quality mode if you've got a 120 hertz display, and you've got the performance mode. And, all of those modes have got strengths and weaknesses, and you choose what you want. The Pro, I was kind of a bit confused because there's no options to select. It's just, you're getting their Pro mode, which is 60 FPS quality mode settings, but using PSSR. And I've got to say, you can that's sort of the performance modes between base and Pro are kind of trading blows in the same way that we've seen with other FSR versus PSSR face-offs at very low resolutions. The quality mode, though, on the base unit, I would say it's better. Because it's just running seemingly at a much higher resolution. And that's kind of surprising in a way, but, it just looks clearer, and you're not getting the same levels of shimmer at rest, so to speak. So yes, there's problems with this one. And I think it's a bit disappointing that it came out and wasn't perhaps put on hold, because, obviously there was reaction to Star Wars Outlaws as well. Actually, didn't you share a video this morning, Alex?
I did, of even more snap, crackle, and pop in that PSSR. Yeah, it is. PSSR is just not acquitting itself well at lower resolutions and titles with ray trace based lighting effects. So, which makes sense, I think, because if Sony was internally training this on their own games, not a lot of their own games used ray trace based lighting. I also think a thing that we saw that is probably not happening is when DLSS, for example, 2.0 came out, the first integrations were done with NVIDIA engineers actually sometimes being sent on site. And the wealth of all the PSSR patches we're seeing coming out, I don't necessarily think that's the case. I don't think Bluebird necessarily had a Sony engineer come in and integrate this. Maybe I'm wrong, but there was a level of oversight there to ensure quality standards from NVIDIA. And, DLSS wasn't open just for everyone to grab. It was actually an approval process for a long period of time at NVIDIA to get it in a title. So, it's a very different rollout than DLSS 2. And I think that's showing off in some of the quality as well as just the model just not being ready. But yeah, I really wish they could roll this back to the way it was before, because I imagine pre-patch you'd be getting much higher DRS resolutions in this title on PS5 Pro, right? So maybe it'd just be even flat out better.
Yeah, we just don't really know at this point. I should have banked some footage beforehand, but this kind of came out of nowhere. Performance. Let's talk about that. I did do some quick frame rate tests. We've got this lovely segment in the game that Tom isolated in the original Avatar review. And we've got lots of atmospherics going on, lots of windy effects and debris flying around. It's a really good stress test, and you would get consistent drops in performance using this particular stress test area. And so we can kind of assume that we're hitting minimum resolution here, which is 720p. The Pro is faster, but it still drops frames under 60. Generally, it is a more consistent experience. It does run faster in its performance mode, but it's not 60 frames per second locked. It's all right, though. I'm not complaining too much about that. It's pretty good. But, again, I just think they should have the various modes in there so the user can choose the experience that works best. I'm okay, actually, with singular modes, but they do need to be thoroughly tested, and the developer needs to be happy with the presentation and the performance level. And I can't imagine that they would be with this, because it just doesn't look great.
That's the thing that really gets me here, and this has kind of been the big differentiator between some of these Pro patches. Is like you look at what Polyphony did with GT7, and you can tell that they were very carefully implementing these Pro features, and they kind of determined what they felt worked and what didn't, and then give the user options, right? Like clearly to get ray tracing in the cockpit in game at 60 FPS, they couldn't use their prior rendering strategy. So they did have to implement PSSR there. But then they also clearly realized, well, we can still do RT without PSSR at 4K. We just have to disable it for this one view. I mean, to me, that's like really smart, like just engineering design, where they like suss out the best and worst case scenarios and then give you the options, right? Whereas some of these Pro patches just feel like they didn't get proper full testing at all, or really much of anything, or like even subjective analysis, where you just look at this and like, okay, this looks objectively actually worse. Maybe we should have options, or maybe we shouldn't do this specific thing. Maybe we should try something else. So, and it seems like a lot of that just hasn't happened. And I understand, like, patches like this probably don't have much budget behind them, not much manpower. They go through the trouble, they implement it, and then it's like, well, okay. Right?
I think the issue is that we were looking for a comprehensive replacement for FSR2. And unfortunately, that does require an upscaler to work from lower resolutions, and PSSR is having issues there. But you're quite right. I mean, we've seen so many games now that have just been deployed with Pro patches that have got issues, right? And you have to wonder. I mean, there does seem to be almost the perception that PSSR was almost treated like a fire and forget solution. Okay, this is machine learning based. It's going to be better. Let's just run with it. But you're looking at issues in Outlaws and Jedi Survivor, Avatar now as well, and it's clearly not the case. It needs to be deployed with some care, and clearly there's still work to do from Sony in terms of getting this where it needs to be. Kind of strange and disappointing, because obviously Avatar is such an awesome game, and to have actual compromised experience from your $700 console, that's problematic. But again, the question really does need to be asked. It's like, literally, this clip panning around, looking at the scenery, shadows clearly bugged, not working properly. And then, just looking at some foliage here, and it's a shimmering mess. I mean, this is basic scrutiny.
I know the foliage to me looks like the worst AO implementation I've ever seen. Basically,
Right.
you know what I mean? It looks like broken AO, or it can't resolve anything. It's all shimmering and just that's not good. I don't understand how this was actually like missed or deemed like, yeah, this is fine.
And it's curious because, we've got two Sony games, Sony first-party games, where the developers have decided, well, maybe the user should have the choice of whether to use PSSR or not, which is quite interesting. God of War and GT7 being the two games in question. And then obviously we've got the Horizon games where Guerrilla just seemingly developed their own solution.
I want to know more about that too, because when you look at Horizon Forbidden West, I really think it's the best image quality I've ever seen in a console game. Like just the clarity, and it's so solid, so free of like shimmering and noise, yet it's so sharp. It's really, really good. And considering how visually dense that game is, that's an impressive achievement. And but we don't know enough about what they're actually doing there. Like what is going on with that mode. Hopefully they share whatever they've learned with other teams, because boy, they're onto something good there.
Yeah. So hopefully there'll be something happening with these games. I mean, obviously we've seen a hotfix of sorts, a mitigation, as we called it last week on Silent Hill 2. And the solution was just to go back to TSR on an Unreal Engine 5 game. That's not an option for Avatar, but I still can't help but think that maybe FSR2 would have produced a better job, crazy as it sounds. But the particular makeup of this game really isn't suiting PSSR. Anyway, let's move on. Okay, so we were approached a couple of weeks back by Ubisoft saying there's going to be a major title update to Star Wars Outlaws, and it has indeed arrived. Alex, you looked at the PC version.
Right.
I know nothing about this, so I'm curious to hear your report.
Well, I was looking at this is called Title Update 4, I believe, for Star Wars Outlaws. And they've been, it's kind of weird to see a game change gameplay after release, but they're like making it so that now in missions, like there's a soft stealth, which generally that's a thing I would approve of, where you can break stealth and not have the mission auto end, for example. They've been changing the game's gameplay, but as a part of this too, there's been some minor and less minor updates to the game's technological backend, some of which were direly needed. Just one I want to get out of the way at the beginning is actually their Title Update 1 fixed ray reconstruction. And I've got this video of it right here. I made this video actually quite a long time ago, but never got to use it on the channel, where at launch there were these really big like trail lines behind any opaque object in the game when moving with ray reconstruction, and I complained about it pretty long in my review, and I was just how did this get in the game? But that was fixed in Title Update 1, so let me get that out of the way. But another thing that this patch changed is it allowed you to turn off the game's lens barrel distortion camera effects. And as you can see here, the side-by-side 1080p DLAA, I wanted to show it off at a low res because I think it maybe is even more stark occasionally. And one thing you'll see is that the image is less zoomed in. That's an effect of it. But also, if you just look at any of the objects in it up close, you'll see that is a lot clearer of an image than with the lens effects on. Now, I can understand going for a cinematic aesthetic in a game, but I'm not sure if it is always a great idea, especially if you're pushing low resolutions, because to do a lens effect in a game with rasterization means you'll have to like automatically zoom the image, and that means you're blowing up per pixel detail up to the full screen, and it's not a 1-to-1 pixel match anymore. So you're getting technically soft scaling artifacts across the entire screen. And you're cutting off the FOV at that point here. You're rendering still technically things outside of screen space at that point. You're wasting a lot of power just to get this lens effect, which then just makes the game less clear, specifically with games using upscaling, So I feel like it's a great win to be able to turn this off as a user now, and I think a lot of people will. And I'm actually pretty sure after I loaded up the patch, it defaulted to off. So apparently the developers think so as well too. Another thing that I wanted to try out is at launch, I noted how these areas right here, like there were patches of like grass, which would cause the frame rate to dip into the 20s with RTX di on. And I was At launch, I was just like, oh my God. Now I can report that those areas are still very heavy, but they do not dip the frame rate into 20s. Like I showed earlier, they go into like on an RTX 4090 into like 40s. So RTX Di on Ultra is still super expensive. There's just going to be areas of the game, presumably due to vegetation and certain types of testing that are done with ray tracing, that are a lot heavier. I cannot QA this entire game though for the developers or anything like that, so there could be technically still areas that have broken performance with RTX Di on, but I can't test an entire game and report back on it. But one thing I could report back on is at launch I noted that when running around there'd be occasional like frame time sputters with RTX Di on, and running through the area like of the market of the first planet, I noticed exactly like 1-to-1 frame times and 1-to-1 frame rates there, excluding some of the little hiccups didn't show, interestingly enough, while running through the market there. But when I was just playing around on my own afterwards, running an unlocked frame rate throughout the world, I did notice that there could be occasional moments where there would be a frame time blip. And while trying to like look at them and correlate them to something that was happening, like me going over a certain part of the world or me getting close to objects or something like that, I really couldn't, as John said earlier, suss out why it is happening. So I would say this TU4 update does bring some nice technical improvements to the game. It performs more or less the same in most areas. Just the RTX Di problems, most of them are gone, it seems like, but it's still very, very heavy. But I still don't know exactly why there can be occasional frame time spikes. They're not huge, but they're there, and I wonder what's causing them. So that's kind of my report here about Star Wars Outlaws, at least on PC.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't stutter primarily CPU these days? Some sort of traversal issue or
usually it is. But there, I mean, if there was some sort of like, I know at launch the issue with the grass going down to 20 FPS, it was like some sort of corrupted geometry or something like that was being traced against, and that could cause like a frame time spike on the GPU technically, but usually if it's like just like a one-off frame, it's probably not the GPU, because GPU is like buffering multiple frames at a time. The next frame would also show evidence of it, etc. So yeah, I think it is probably some sort of CPU related thing. And since it seems to be related to RTX Di, it could be related to the fact that there's just so much more stuff in that BVH now with RTX Di on that isn't there without RTX Di on.
Okay, fair enough. Well, that's our Ubisoft Massive segment done for this week's Direct. Let's move on. Okay, so this is kind of coming out of nowhere again. Intel looks set to release its second generation GPUs, discrete GPUs, the Battle Beige series. Seemingly coming.
Yeah, yes. Thank you.
Coming imminently. There have already been leaks of the Intel Arc B580 seemingly coming our way. B580. Now, this is going to be quite interesting because we would assume that there would be like a B780,
right?
You know, if we're following on from first gen Arc. So this is their mid-range part that's being leaked, the B580. Let's take a look at some of the mooted specifications. Just taking a look at video cards for this. Nothing official yet, but the indications are that we're looking at 20 Xe2 cores, GPU clock in the 2.8 gigahertz area, 192-bit memory interface for 12 gigs of GDDR6, which is great. Interesting interface here, PCIe Gen 5 X8. And yes, there's been a leaked Geekbench benchmark, which doesn't look particularly great, but doesn't also look particularly accurate. So, Alex, any thoughts on this? I mean, this must be music to your ears from a certain perspective because, well, we were discussing it last week that basically there isn't a decent entry-level graphics card under $300 that actually has 12 gigs of memory. This will have 12 gigs of memory. There have been leaked price points of $250. So in theory, this could be pretty good, right?
Yeah, I think that is one thing when I look at this leaked specs, where I think at least it won't. Who can say anything else about this GPU right now? This is leaked specs, whatever. But at least if that one aspect is correct, it won't suffer from the issues we see on the NVIDIA side with the 4060 Ti, 3070, whatever, where you run into the problem in a game where you have to start turning down settings to find out what is causing your VRAM to go over and cause massive performance issues. Because when VRAM is overburdened, the performance degradation is massive, and it's not at all ignorable. Either it means big stutters, or it means just tanked performance. We're talking like 10 or 20 FPS at a time. Really big difference. So I think that it would be amazing if that is the case. And I think getting that to the entry level GPU space, which I would think $250 is, if that is true, that is extremely great, and it would be an amazing precedent for AMD and NVIDIA to follow. But I don't think Intel is a trendsetter necessarily. NVIDIA and AMD will probably do their own thing regardless of whatever Intel does, because Intel is still the small, not historically anchored player in this highly competitive market. So, but I mean, I think it makes sense this time around if they do focus on this part, because they were really drumming up that A750 last time around with massive discounts. And it seems like it was the card that was the one that had the most notoriety, the one that was probably recommended quite a lot for people looking for certain things. A770, pretty cool. I think it's a good looking card too, at least in the kind of like engineering sample version I have, at least.
Well, that's the Intel reference design.
Intel reference design,
and it is cool. Yeah,
I like it. And same would apply to the 750 too in reference. But I think that is a good market to go after here, because, unless you really have incredible performance, which I can't say anything about that because we don't know what their top end card might be. I think focusing then a little bit on the lower end market is a good idea, unless you're really breaking like the 4070s back or something like that with whatever your next card is. So in that case, good, but I still want to see more, because we've seen so much with driver issues with Intel, as well as just compatibility issues when games launch, that it still needs to be proven as a product beyond some sort of specs leak.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on this, John?
I like the name. No.
B580.
I mean, realistically here, the key with Intel cards seems to be that they do, at least in the past, they've offered pretty good value for the money, I would say. Yeah. And I think it's pretty obvious that if you're looking at the high end, like NVIDIA is going to remain the one to beat. But Intel, I think it's cool that they're coming in and trying to fill this like sort of affordable GPU bracket, because frankly, GPU prices are pretty out of control. They're very, very high. And if you can get something that's actually pretty decent and they can actually build upon, because there was a lot of good things about their previous generation product, I would say, but plenty of drawbacks as well. And obviously we're going to have to wait and see how this turns out, but there is definitely some potential here that's worth watching for sure. It's not necessarily a product for me per se, given that I tend to gravitate towards the high end stuff, right? But we need cards like this. Takes me back to the old Intel i740 days, which the only Intel GPU I ever bought for myself.
Well, to be fair, they haven't made a huge amount of them, especially in recent times.
No, they have
not. Well, my thoughts on this. Where do we begin? First of all, if you're going to get a 12 gig card out that's under $300, that's great, because it is starting to become an issue. I mean, there have been titles where it has been an issue, but you can just turn down the textures and it's not really a problem. But it's pretty clear at this point that what can I say? The PlayStation 5 has 12 gigs of memory available for games, 12.5 actually. So, a lot of that is going on graphics. And so when it comes to the PC ports, it's a shame because there's so many 8 gig cards out there, but, the focus isn't really there. on some titles, and that is problematic. Also, if you're having like sudden, I mean, it's not great, but typically the user just ramps up the settings and then hopes for the best, as opposed to sort of having a sort of strategy of like testing each and every setting in order to see whether that's the issue that's affecting performance. But textures certainly can affect performance. So if there is a 12 gig card that's cheap, $250, amazing. The next question is performance. This is the key, right? How performant is the B580 going to be? There's been, if we look at this leak from video cards of, I think it's a Geekbench score, it's really not looking good at all. Clearly there's something odd there. However, other leaks are suggesting something ballpark 4060 Ti. If they're doing 4060 Ti performance, even in the ballpark, for $250 with 12 gigs of memory, I'd say that's a very, very good, very good card. But it is all related to driver quality.
Right.
It still seems to be a bit sort of hit and miss, certainly on recent titles where the existing Intel Arc seems to be sort of gradually moving down and down the bar charts that I see. And that is a bit disappointing, but it's obviously got to change up if they're getting a new product out there. So I'm going to look forward to this. I'm really hoping that this mooted release date of December is true. It's an odd time to release a graphics card, which says to me they know that the Blackwell stuff is coming from NVIDIA and they want to actually possibly be able to claim some sort of market leadership before those cards come out. If it's in the $250 area, I think that's actually fantastic, because that whole area is kind of stagnant at the moment. It's just not particularly compelling or interesting whatsoever. I mean, a 4060, it's all right. That's really the best thing you can say about it. It's all right, but then you've got to contend with the 8 gigs of memory. AMD haven't got anything better. 7600, 8 gigs of memory. You might get a Black Friday deal or something on the XT, which has 16 gigs, but it's essentially the same card, which is fine, but, it's not MSRP territory. If there's a firm statement from Intel here saying, we've got this $250 card, it's awesome, it doesn't have VRAM issues, it is performant, check this out, then I think that's going to, certainly make an impact.
Yeah.
So, what can I say? Looking forward to it. We're also going to be, hopefully, because we're still working on fully automating our GPU benchmarks, but we can talk about some of that actually. We're going to be automating our GPU benchmarks, essentially. Similar process to the thing that we did with CPUs, right? Which is that essentially, you can see my PC test systems in the background there. They will just literally benchmark themselves. And there are some games, of course, that don't have benchmarks, like Alan Wake 2, for example. When you really want to stress test a particular area that's heavy on the GPU. So, our collaborator, contributor, Illusion, has produced some really nice automated benchmarks, which will basically take you through that forest in Alan Wake 2 that's so heavy on GPU performance. And it will be, no manual input required. The run will be identical from run to run. So that's the sort of stuff we're working on in the background there. And we're also looking to revolutionize the amount of data that we're bringing in with each benchmark. So we want to have power metrics just happening as we benchmark. We want to have input lag, latency. We want to have those metrics ready to hand. So, we can give you a more fully rounded view of how that's all going to pan out, as we move on to this new system. More data, but actually the philosophy is actually to produce more data, but we're probably going to be using less data, because the idea is that we actually want to show how these cards are going to be used by the end user. So, for the B580, for example, B580, we're going to benchmark it with a 9800X3D. But, who's going to be pairing a 9800X3D with a P580? Virtually no one. So, the ability to automate the benchmarks is, we can then test it on another system. I guess maybe a Ryzen 5600 would be a good bet at this point.
Yeah.
Maybe even the 3600, but possibly not. But yeah, that's basically our sort of strategy. We were planning to roll out this new system for January, assuming that's when Blackwell arrives. But if indeed Intel is arriving in December, then we're going to have to step up our
Doing
plans.
some stuff, yeah. Mhm.
Yes. Okay. Let's move on. Okay, I don't really know what to make about this. Tencent released some materials this week for Light of Motiram, and everybody has basically looked at it and said it's a Horizon Zero Dawn ripoff. And certainly in terms of the aesthetic, let's just say it's very, very similar. I'm going to actually put a quick caveat on this before we continue. I remember back in 1990, I wrote one of my first ever video game reviews, and I just said, this game is a rip-off of another game. And the first thing I was told was, actually, that's a legally actionable statement, unless you could categorically prove it, which, would actually involve determining intent. Mm-hmm. So let's just say that Light of Motiram bears a lot of resemblances to Horizon Zero Dawn. And to the point where the key art looks very, very similar. The mechanized dinosaurs, well, it's not just the same concept, but the same execution. And yet, it's not a game like Horizon Zero Dawn. John, have you got any input on this?
Well, I'd like to start, Rich, by reminding everyone here, or bringing awareness to this, that this is a game that seems to embody what I call the four horsemen of the apocalypse of gaming. If you check out, it is four things. It's early access, survival, open world, crafting. When these forces combine, actually, I don't know if this will be open or early access, but I bet I wouldn't be surprised if it were. That's usually that's the four horsemen of the gaming apocalypse right there, and it seems like it's going to check off most of those boxes, because it's like, what if Horizon Zero Dawn, but instead of a story, instead of characters, we just filled it with survival and crafting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It is.
No, it's
Oh my God.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, it's kind of like the lazy man's version of game design, where you don't actually have to make interesting encounters. You just make the player character make the encounters for themselves by having them have survival elements, which force them to interact with like minuscule gameplay. I think survival has its place, but it is an oft abused way to get gameplay into a game without designing much, actually. Sorry.
That's important to note, Alex, I think, because I think there are certainly cases for really interesting survival mechanics, and there are very well designed survival games out there, but it has become sort of it's become something of a crutch that allows it's a not a difficult thing to implement and do in a way that's not very good.
Right.
As well, which could be argued of many things, but with survival games it's especially egregious, I find. And in this case, I mean, more so, like, you look at something like Pow World, and that felt like, but in reality, Pow World played so distinctively different from, it was just an open world survival crafting game, right? Which no Pokemon game is. It is nothing like Pokemon. The characters and the designs were extremely similar, but the game itself was so drastically different. But when you look at these shots here, like, I wasn't sure if in this article that we're looking at here, if they were posting initially comparisons to Horizon, or if they were all from the new game, but they're all from this new game, because it is like, this has to be one of the most egregious I've ever seen. Like, everything about this looks like this could be from Horizon, versus Power World, where you look at it and you're like, okay, I mean, you know what they're going for, but it doesn't actually look exactly like Pokemon. This looks exactly like Horizon. Like, right down to like the tribal characters sitting around. Like, I can look at these and I'm like, oh, this bottom shot where they're sitting around like this little bucket of water by the sea. I'm like, oh yeah, that looks like that San Francisco area in Forbidden West. I recognize that spot, or the part in the snow, like all of these things. Yeah. Like, you can almost picture where this is at in Horizon, which is how close it is. But I guess the twist on this is that people seem to love this stuff. They love games that take other, sort of build on inspirations of other games. and then it finds success. Sometimes it works. Like I remember when Genshin Impact was first announced, everybody's like, "Oh, it's just a Breath of the Wild ripoff." But in reality, it's kind of its own thing, and it's quite good in its own way. It definitely bears resemblance visually in many ways, but they created something genuinely good there. I would say Power World is still not actually very good. People just liked it because it was like a middle finger to Game Freak, and it had designs that people liked and such, but the game itself wasn't really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got to apologize. I've got to apologize. It's actually Light of Motiram.
Light of Motiram.
Yeah, and I've just posted in the Discord chat here some actual gameplay. And surprise, surprise, it bears no relation whatsoever to Horizon Zero Dawn. It looks a lot more like Ark Survival Evolved, funny enough.
So it is the four horsemen of the gaming apocalypse.
In that aspect, yes. I mean, Ark is the herald of the apocalypse.
You know what? So this is fun. This gives me a moment to sort of touch on the power of the sort of carefully crafted bull shot, if you will, where the shots that were going around for this game look exactly like Horizon. But when you actually see the graphics here in game, this looks significantly worse than Horizon. Like this looks the way it moves, the way it's lit, everything about it, you're like, okay, this looks like a bad mobile take on Horizon, where the other one looked technically competent in the screenshots. This doesn't actually look all that competent compared to Horizon. Like not at all, actually. Like it's got stiff animation, weird collision with the terrain. Nothing about the lighting or the environment is particularly good looking. It's just like very average, normal looking. It just looks like Unreal stuff.
Yeah, while you guys were chatting, I was just looking for video, right? First of all, I found the reveal trailer, which kind of looks like Horizon in a desert. And then I actually found this stream, 16 minutes of gameplay of Light of Motiram. And it's apparently this gameplay hails from the official account of Light of Motiram in China. And yeah, there do seem to be some Horizon-related beasts, mech beasts. However, the game just isn't really Horizon as I see it. There is a lot of it's a lot of Arc.
Why is everything got to be Arc, man? I was
talking about this yesterday. Stated.
Yeah, I know it's easy to implement, but I'm like, all these clones tend to be, the whole survival open world crafting games. Like, where's the arcade racers here? Like, something like, why not outrun coast to coast, but like actually coast to coast?
We have the technology, we can build it.
We have the technology, we can make that. But then you're right, that's harder to make versus this.
I mean, for some, like, and just in also building a world thing, you don't need as much cohesion. You don't even need to be making the assets like a coast to coast game with a consistent art style. You couldn't just grab from an asset store random palm tree necessarily.
You can't procedurally generate that and make it good.
Yeah, right. So there's a lot of reasons why this type of game design is so popular, especially for the early access for Horsemen of the Apocalypse, like you described.
If you skip ahead to 10 minutes and 5 seconds in that gameplay demo that I just sent you, check this out. This is riveting stuff.
Oh, okay, yeah.
There it is. I like the way the rock breaks apart, but yeah, it's like once the giant like pickaxe comes out and you just walk up to things and hold a button until more things come out.
Yep.
And a number too. Baby. Don't forget the number.
Crafting. The number, man.
So, I'd say that there's a variety of let's be kind and call it inspirations.
Oh, look at the grass though.
The tall grass, the sneak grass looks so much like the Horizon grass.
They got the sneak grass like right after they finished doing the I guess the mining for materials or whatever. Then they hop on that mount and immediately cross through the Horizon stealth grass.
Yeah. And if we go ahead to 1252, we've got a boss. 1252 time code.
Exciting
there.
Times.
It's kind of like Mecha Gorilla.
Yeah. So
yeah, I mean, the thing is though, that artwork that they released on those screenshots, it is basically very, very And maybe that's the point, reminiscent of Horizon, right down to having like the different biomes, the snow from Frozen Wilds. But then you look
I
at
got to
the
give them
game.
credit here, though, Rich. Like boss stuff, like making bosses is pretty tough. So they actually seem to have done a competent job here with this boss, I would say. Like that is not a trivial thing to implement.
No.
So that's cool.
Comparatively.
At least.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just mechanized dinosaurs here. We've moved on to mechanized primates as well.
Yeah, mechanized
This is
primates.
like,
Man, they should make
Yeah,
a Beast
it's-
Wars game. That's all I keep thinking about. John, Beast Wars.
I'd be into that. Did that never? I feel like it feels
What
like
if
it
it-
should have happened, but
what if it's Beast Wars with early access crafting?
Survival
open world
crafting, open
survival.
world. Maybe I should
Survival.
not wish for things. That's what I'm learning right now.
Gosh, I feel like, man, this is like open world survival crafting early access games feels like it's like that continuation of where you would get like the Smash arcade hit on your Amiga or your ZX Spectrum back in the day.
Oh yeah.
And then they show screenshots of the arcade game on the back and you pop it in. It's just, I mean, you know what it is, Rich.
Yeah.
It ain't the arcade game.
Yeah.
It feels like that kind of bait and switch almost.
Yeah, man, that brings back some memories. Anyway, let's move on. Okay, so we were going to talk about this last week, but John wasn't available and none of us had actually looked at the material. But last week it was the 20th anniversary of Half-Life 2. Yay. And to celebrate the occasion, there was a new build of the game plus documentary about Half-Life. And John, you have watched all the material.
I've watched all the material.
Yep. And of course, there's also the new Half-Life 2 RTX trailer as well, which is great. Tell us more. What did you learn from this documentary?
Oh man, there's so much so first of all, you should all definitely watch it. It's very well done. I believe Danny and NoClip worked on that and created something truly fantastic. And there's a lot of great insight there from a lot of the developers that worked on it. And it kind of it really brings home like why Valve is the way they are with the way they treat the Half-Life series and the way they view it internally. Half-Life needs to be something that pushes boundaries, right? Half-Life is a vehicle for new technology, new methods of storytelling. That's the most important thing to them. And that's, it's kind of revealed at one point that, hey, they could have done episode 3 at any point. They were working on it. They actually show footage in there of the episode 3 stuff with the ice gun and all that kind of stuff. But as Gabe said, just pushing the story forward alone, it's not interesting to them. And I think that's why we ended up with something like Half-Life Alyx, which I consider the official Half-Life 3, basically. Even if maybe it's Half-Life 0, I don't know. But that pushed technology. And it seems like when they were building Half-Life 2, that this is when they really started to struggle with that. Like, what do they want to do? And we got some really cool footage out of that, including the entirety of the SIGGRAPH 2000 demo, which was, I guess, the first time they ever showed anything that they were working on. It looks completely different, but you can already see this sort of like, I guess, this city under control of the Combine concept. But it's definitely, it's got tanks running through the city. They really focused on this guy that was like free TVs or whatever.
I love that guy.
Where he's like running through the street, he got a TV, and then they show like the Combine police or the Metro cops, as they called it, like I guess an early take on them, sort of getting into battle with that. They also show that sort of like, I guess it's like an Arctic area. They were really interested in this idea of like going on an icebreaker for a while, it seems like. And they kind of discuss how as part of the iteration process, even taking tours to visit this type of ship, they kind of discovered like, wait, this isn't actually going to be very fun or usable in a game like this. So they cut it. But there's that SIGGRAPH stuff. There's just so many little ideas in there that you can see they carried forward all the way through to the end of the project, even though it looks extremely different. But the E3 2002 one also really caught my interest because this is the one that they had intended to show at E3 2003. They were going to reveal the game publicly there, and then they decided at the last minute not to do it, which is a very Valve thing to do, and I think it was the right choice. Like the demo opens with them just walking around sort of like the The area next to the sea, very unfinished, was just like showing off their terrain system, and there's just ant lions charging the player, and he's just kind of engaging them. And frankly, it doesn't look all that interesting or engaging when you see that footage. Like the actual landscape could be cool, but I see this and there's none of the, I guess, magic of what makes Half-Life 2 so special during that early section. They do go into Kleiner's lab. There is a little bit of physics stuff in there. They do show the icebreaker again, which they were really obsessed with that icebreaker idea for a while. It just didn't work out. They do show some fighting on the city streets. I noted that the demo is actually presented in 4:3,
right?
As well, because that was still like the common aspect ratio of the era. But even though, again, there's a lot of concepts in here where you can see like this is what would be brought forward to the final game, it's not there. It's just not there yet. And that's where the E3 2003 demo came out, and Valve actually finally released like a super high quality version of that original demo, which I think is awesome because so I don't know, where were you guys at when you first saw the E3 2003 demo?
I want to say I remember watching the released Bink videos. I watched the demo online, but then there was like separate downloadable Bink videos that were like, I don't know how many seconds long they were. They were very short.
They were short.
But I downloaded them and I was just like, whoa. This is incredible.
Yeah, that whole Bink thing they used to do where they would just release a standalone EXE with a Bink encoded video and you would click it to watch the video, which is actually an interesting idea when there was no video streaming services available, right? Mm-hmm. But seeing this demo again, the full demo, in its highest quality, like for those that weren't there, it's really difficult. Like I talked about Halo 2 recently and the memories of that, but Half-Life 2, this demonstration was one of those things where it really gave us this glimpse of what next generation possibilities could hold, both from a rendering perspective and from a gameplay interactivity perspective. Like physics were a thing since, I mean, technically they'd been around in games. I mean, Hitman and its ragdolls was pretty early on. And then when Unreal 2003 was in development, because they were showing off the ragdoll physics on characters that looked a lot better than Hitman. But then Half-Life 2, they finally show like the whole world is now filled with rigid body objects everywhere that interact with the player. They can be destroyed, moved, pushed around, affected by external forces. And they show so much of this in this demo. And I just love this. This is such a brilliant way to showcase a new game because they first start by walking through just like an engine demonstration showing, we're using the latest in pixel shader technology. We're doing cool stuff with the water. We're using like normal maps now in a big way. We're able to do all kinds of fancy visual effects and distortions and things that weren't really done yet in games at the time, right? Like it was just starting to show up thanks to the Xbox and early PC shader model hardware, but it was uncommon still, I would say. And Half-Life 2 really moved the bar forward in terms of showing off this stuff. But then they get into a bunch of these different little scenarios where it just shows a little snippet of like, this is what a level in the game is going to be like. And it kind of lets them show off the different gameplay ideas that they envisioned. So instead of just being a single spot, it's like, well, here's an area where, lots of physics are in play. Here's where you're driving the vehicle. Here's where you're fighting in the streets. And it just looked just about better than anything that we'd ever seen before, right? Like it was unbelievable. This was the moment where like, okay, yeah, the consoles they're outclassed now. Oh, right.
Yeah. That and Doom.
Although they did get their own Half-Life 2 ports at some point.
Well, Xbox did.
Xbox, PS2, alas.
I'm not sure PS2 and or GameCube would really have any hope of running Half-Life 2, frankly.
Memory, right?
Especially just memory alone. Like I think with something like Doom 3, I've talked with people that are like, Doom 3, there are ways to do this on a PS2. It's not easy. And you probably couldn't do the full maps. It would have to be cut way down because of memory as well. But there are ways to get a lot of what Doom 3 is doing in there. Half-Life 2, though, I think just no way. And Xbox itself handled it, but just barely, I would say. lots of frame rate issues and cut down levels and stuff, but it's still amazing that it ran at all on that system. Very impressive there. But so another thing they did is they actually went back and fixed up the game, because when they did the orange box updates, they actually broke a lot of things. Like there was some cool new features. For instance, they added flashlight shadows, which did not ship in the original 2004 version at all. They added in motion blur on the camera, which actually looked pretty good, I would say. They did HDR lighting pipeline in there. I don't know if, I guess Half-Life 2 kind of used it, but it wasn't initially really arted for it. So stuff like that. But then the one that always got me was like the G-Man's eyes in the very intro cutscene. They looked wrong in the orange box. They were too green and like too matte, and it was like missing like the slight glossiness and the darker color of the original. They restored that. As I pointed out in my video many years ago, things like the combine vehicles, like in the city streets during the intro of City 17, when you're walking around, when they updated it, like the vehicles sort of like were pushed down just slightly, so the wheels clipped through the world, and rather than sitting on the world. So they actually fixed that. There's just countless bugs like that. All these little tiny things everywhere that they went back by hand and corrected them. They also did things like enhanced filtering for the light maps. It's like bicubic filtering now. So you actually get, it sort of eliminates the pixelation that you get with light maps. And by the way, of course, Half-Life 2 uses light maps. This was before moving towards like fully real-time lighting. And that's actually one of the secrets why it still looks so good, I would say. Because they relied on light maps, and baking out light maps like this allowed you to capture a lot of like indirect lighting detail in the scene that, although static, looks better than what would kind of follow, I would argue, for a while, until we were able to do more real-time GI effects. They added radial fog, which really makes that level out next to the sea look a lot better, because you would often look out into the distance and just the ocean looked not good. The way it clipped off. There's just so many other little things in there, and optimizations to the UI, better stuff for Steam Deck,
controller support out of the box.
Controller support out of the box. It's better than it was. Like, they went through a full HDR lighting and tone mapping pass across every map in the game. They went back and added commentary to the original game, which was a feature they had done with the episodes. It was so good.
It's very good.
And now they went back and did the entire thing, where you get like lots of cool commentary from the developers on things and why they did certain things in the game. And it's just really cool to hear that now, especially from a modern perspective. Like, I could go on and on and on here, and like, it's just, to me, like, this whole celebration, this webpage they put together, putting out the game initially for free, and it's real cheap. There's the soundtracks out there. There's tons of art, extreme granular detail on every change they made. They even made it so you can go back to the version before this update if you so desire. There's just so much like really like consumer facing looking things here that really make you say like, oh yeah, like this is one of the reasons why Valve is always so renowned for what they do. They really took such great care with this in a way that shows that they respect their legacy, which is something I would say many publishers do not. They do not respect the legacy of their games.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Is the original version still accessible? The original?
There are ways to get it. And I did it in my video. It's not, I don't think through Steam. I think it's tricky. This one, at least, like, you can turn on things like the old fire effects and, various other things to simulate the look of the original. But I don't think the original is available. And I guess it's also worth highlighting that maybe because of all the rose tinted goggles and such over the years, people have maybe forgotten that when Half-Life 2 did launch, it was actually in a really rough state. It was known, you could even hear it in the original E3 demo, for stuttering, like bad stuttering, like stuttering that makes the stuttering we talk about today like look like nothing. It's like that Stalker 2 thing you pointed out, Alex, when you transition into the town.
Yeah.
Like those types, except for the sound would be like ding, 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 ding. You know what I mean?
I distinctly recall this, yes.
There was almost no way to completely eliminate that at the time. Even on a powerful PC, it was just every time it had to hit the hard drive for something, the game just wasn't ready and it would grind to a halt while it loaded the data, and then the sound would skip. And it was pretty tough to play out of the box. Or that was the introduction of Steam, obviously.
Not really out of the box anymore.
I did buy the physical version of that, though, with the DVD. Doom 3 that year actually launched in a much better state. You could just play it right off the discs, and it was like super smooth and performant without any patches, which was cool. But obviously, they've long fixed that. Half-Life 2 runs like butter now. It's in an awesome state, and I can't wait for Half-Life 2 RTX.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good looking trailer.
So yeah, that's Half-Life. Any thoughts, Alex, on your experiences with?
Well, from what I watched, I was just to comment on the documentary, I really enjoyed how they presented the Half-Life 1 footage in 4:3 at era appropriate resolutions. I'm hoping you noticed that, John. It was like 800 by 600, I think.
Yep.
Which I vastly approve. I think that especially contained in that 4K edited the 4K edited container, it made it look way better than just like some random 16:9 4K video would make Half-Life look, I think. I also loved a lot of the pre-designed stuff that just never got in. The idea that Half-Life would have been like a 30 to 40 hour game with all these different zones you go to, but then the end game is much more self-contained. Still has that, like, you go from one area to the next where you can kind of see it like Half-Life 1 did. It's not as good as Half-Life 1 in that aspect, but like it would have been even more, I don't know, like more directed almost sounding in its original idea of like going to that like Borealis station or whatever they called it, as well as a C-130 ride in the sky. Can't even imagine what that would have looked like visually. Probably very awkward. And so I'm actually happy it got axed. But yeah, I thought it was really cool. I have yet to finish the documentary. I did watch the 2002 demo and the SIGGRAPH demo because those are completely new to me. So I was excited to watch those, and they look great.
Cool, right?
I think there is one thing I'd like to add, which is basically around the turn of the century, there is this problem with existing versions of marketing assets or trailers just being really poor quality, if they exist at all.
Yeah.
And I think there has to be some sort of push to actually preserve some of this stuff, bring it out of the archives. I mean, another classic example would be the original Metal Gear Solid 4 trailer, which you can either watch at very low resolution at 60 frames per second or at 720p at 30 frames per second. You can't actually see what the original one looked like. So there's a lot of stuff that's maybe hidden in vaults somewhere that would be great to actually have some sort of, reference copy. I mean, again, speaking about Danny's, the No Clip archive is looking to bring out some of those old
awesome
Betacam SP tapes and get them on YouTube upscaled to 1080p or 4K or whatever. That's a really great initiative. And something I keep thinking about a lot of the time is that there's actually a lot of press material that was given out at that period on CD-ROMs, and some of that stuff should be preserved. And I think it's going to require a concerted effort from somebody to actually get an appeal out to all of the older journalists to dig into their archives and upload some of this stuff so it can be preserved. But yeah, I mean, what could I say? Yeah, this was a real treat by all accounts. I'm looking forward to watching it.
And it's kind of interesting how Kojima and Konami went nuts with MGS2 back in the day, where you both got an actual official DVD with the trailer at the maximum quality, and then they later put out a whole making of disc that was a retail product about all the behind the scenes stuff for Metal Gear Solid 2.
Yeah,
which is honestly nuts. Like, I don't think anybody else has really done that before. We're like, yeah, we can sell two different products. Here's the trailer, and then later here's the behind the scenes. And like, it's really behind the scenes. They let you go nuts with it, fully interactive and all that. That was awesome.
There's a lot of broadcast quality stuff that's going to be in archive somewhere. For example, I can't remember which year it was. Maybe E3 98. It would have been the N64. Reveal where you could have played, and indeed I did play Super Mario 64.
Oh, that would have been
There was
96 or 95.
90, yeah, that's probably more likely, yeah. And, there were broadcast quality Beta SP tapes given to journalists, I remember, because I had one.
Wow.
And, that would have had early footage of all of those games. It's all sort of lost now. There's screenshots of it in the magazines of the era, because that's what we did. We hired in one of these decks, these massive broadcast decks, and then just took screenshots of it. But yeah, there was no video delivery mechanism in 96. So,
Nope.
so yeah, there's a lot of stuff in the archives there that I'd love to see. Anyway, let's move on. Dynasty Warriors Origins. John, there's a demo. You and I have both played it. I've only played it for about 5 or 10 minutes, but I think there were some initial concerns about this. I mean, this is a weird sort of franchise that started off on PlayStation 2 running at 60 frames per second, and then gradually over the years seemed to get slower.
It did.
But this is actually looking like dare I say it, it's early days, but it's looking like a return to form, as they say.
Yeah, this is like the first time since the PS2 era, I would say, where it actually feels like solid and smooth, which is a funny thing to think about. Because, like, you're right, it ran great on the PS2, but then ever since they made the jump to HD, it felt like they never managed to get their performance under control.
Yeah.
So they always ran poorly. And that includes Dynasty Warriors 9, which was just like, oh my goodness. That was something.
Well, at launch, that was not great, wasn't it?
They've improved it, but I could not believe at how much more polished, smooth, and well animated and just like solid this demo of Dynasty Warriors Origins really turned out to be. Like, it's still Dynasty Warriors, don't get me wrong. It's, it follows that same formula, but it's smooth. So I played on the Pro. There are a bunch of modes. Not every one of them is necessarily choice. There's like a balanced and like performance mode, and both of those seem to just run at 60 FPS without issue. Maybe a couple little hiccups here in the more balanced one or whatever it's called, but it's like basically locked, which that's what we haven't seen in a long time. There's a native 4K mode, which can drop into the 40s instead. That's less interesting. I guess that's for the PS5 Pro, since we're already on the Pro. But then there is a 120 hertz mode, and that's the one that's weird because it doesn't really seem to work right, where the frame rate seems like it goes above 60 maybe, but like something with the way the camera works means that it doesn't feel smooth. It feels like it's running in non-VRR mode, even though it does trigger VRR, even if you have the Force VRR off. So it wants to use it. It just doesn't look right when doing so. I don't know what's up with that. So I hope they can fix that, because otherwise then you get an even higher frame rate, which would be great. But as is, 60 FPS, good looking visuals, like good animation, like it looks way less stiff than a lot of the recent attempts. Like everything about it is just far more attractive than it's been in like 20 years. I don't know. What do you think, Rich? I mean, I imagine you feel similarly.
Yeah, I mean, I played it on the base PlayStation 5 because that's the one I've got hooked up at the moment. And I used the prioritized performance mode, 60 frames per second. And it was basically, well, what can I say about, it wasn't locked 60, but it was, 50 to 60. And it was perfectly fine, right? I think this is really kind of, I was pleasantly surprised, John. Also, it just, as you say, it was just really polished. Good fun. Just seemed like, as I said, a return to series roots, but at the same time, it was clearly a game of this generation, so to speak. It looked pretty good. So, not really too much more to add to that because I've only played one mode for like 10 minutes. But I will say that it does seem to be an incredible amount of cutscenes, some of which are at 30 frames per second.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a demo, and we'll see. We'll see how these games usually have a very specific pacing. What I didn't investigate, though, I'm wondering if this uses the same engine that the Neo series is using.
No, right.
If it's derived from that, because the way the graphics modes presents reminds me of Neo in a way that other Dynasty Warriors games did not. So I'm wondering if they've just simply...
What do they call that?
Taken that... I'm forgetting the name as well. You know the one, though.
Yeah, it's got like they call it the Samurai engine or something like that. I can't remember.
But it also made me wonder, like, I wonder what Neo 2's like on the PS5 Pro now. Because remember, that had a
Katana
120
engine.
mode, and it was quite unstable.
Yeah, really. This is also one I think I sent John a trailer of it a while back because I was like, oh, this PC version actually looks good. They released a PC trailer for this, and I was like, at least I think that was it, right, John? Did I say that?
Think so.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure this is coming out for PC. Excuse me, but that looks good because usually releases like this on PC from lesser known, I would say, Japanese devs always get me a little worried. But maybe this one will be good based upon your experience there on PlayStation 5.
Yeah. Oh, so thinking of the engine stuff, I guess we don't know, but that was obviously Team Ninja's technology, right?
Sure.
But since they kind of work under Koei Tecmo, maybe they just adopted it for the whole company. I don't know. It does look a lot more like those games than Dynasty Warriors typically did, I would say, in a good way. Like it just looks better. Like something like DW9 was. Whew. I know they were going for scale, but that was not a pretty game.
Well, what can I say? I'm looking forward to seeing more on this one. I have to play a bit more of the demo. I've only played it on the base system, but it is available with Pro support as well. So yeah, we'll check that out for sure. Okay, let's move on. Final news story. It's not really a news story, just a heads up to a YouTube channel that I'm actually quite enjoying and wanted to share with you all. It's called Brazil Pixel. And basically, well, what can I say? In 2008, we first captured HDMI output, and then we compared the output of one frame to another frame, and then plotted a grid. And that's basically what began performance analysis from console games, and not much has changed since then. Obviously, we've had the addition of frame time graphs, which has been really, really interesting and obviously crucial information. But where do you go from there? And not many people have actually elevated the data, but Brazil Pixel is doing some really interesting stuff in that they are essentially adding a lot more information. The centerpiece, I'd say, of the new stuff is the addition of dynamic resolution scaling mapping. The algorithm is somewhat difficult to describe in DF Direct Weekly, which is basically a chat show, right? But, well, it's like this. Essentially, a spatial image is converted into the frequency space using discrete cosine transformation or using Fourier transformations. Brazil Pixel actually posted an article on a Brazilian website I've linked in the video description, and in that he takes you through what game imagery looks like via those transformations and how native resolution is kind of signposted or highlighted, for want of a better term. Those highlighted indicators for native resolution essentially present as horizontal vertical black lines through the image. For a more in-depth look at the methodology here, I've also added a link to iRoboto's thread on the Beyond 3D forum, which has a wealth of information on the technique along with analysis of lots of sample imagery from a big bunch of games. It's all fascinating work that's well worth looking into if you're interested. But yeah, if you look at these videos here, it is mapping dynamic resolution changes. The most recent video he's put out is actually for Dynasty Warriors, which we've just talked about. And you can actually see there in the prioritized graphics thing targeting 60 frames per second, how the resolution is changing according to load. Really, really interesting stuff. You're sort of mapping the average dynamic resolution there, minimum, maximum. Typically what we do in a kind of broad form, but actually in real time. And if you look in the top left there, you can see the sort of DCT map. And you can kind of see like how can I describe it? It's kind of like a line that bisects the image there. It looks like random noise, but it's not. But you can kind of discern native rendering resolution there. And I think what's interesting about this is that we did actually do some analysis of this back in the day, and it was inconclusive. We started by looking to see if you could ascertain native resolution. We didn't quite get as far as Brazil Pixel here. Then we were kind of looking at using frequency to sort of give a kind of sharpness or a clarity metric, which would actually possibly mapped to the way we actually see resolution as opposed to discerning native resolution. That kind of didn't go so far because different upscaling techniques produced different results. And then FSR2 came along, and the noise that FSR2 produced actually turned into what was perceived as extra detail when it's far from it. But yeah, I mean, I really want you to check out this Brazil Pixel channel. He's only got 1.74k subscribers at the moment, deserves a lot more. So do check it out, because there's actually new and interesting stuff happening here. I have swapped a couple of emails with him. And what can I say? It's not so often that you see people pushing the existing console analysis tools further than they've gone at the moment. But, you know, this guy's doing it. It's not easy. I do think there is still some level of manual intervention required. I mean, when you look at the visualizations in the top left there, it's pretty noisy, right? But the fact that this is, you know, producing some really interesting results is worthy of checking out. You know, there's quite a lot of different videos there. I also quite like the way, in the wake of the Pro review that I did, where we mapped the power mapping, the power consumption of the PS5 Pro. He's added that here as well, so you can see Dynasty Warriors, for example, is drawing
so
about
cool.
220 or 230 watts, which is in line with what I generally saw with Pro software as well. So that's a really nice little metric to add as well. So yeah, what can I say? Check out this channel. It's great. You know, as I understand it, he's doing this all in his spare time. There's not a huge amount of content there, but check it out, because I'm really, really impressed. I guess my question for you guys is, I mean, we've kind of been on a mission to downplay native resolutions because they are kind of becoming less and less meaningful. But at the same time, I kind of like the idea of having this kind of data to hand. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious what you think about this. I mean, theoretically, it can be done. It's being proven here. So should we do it? Alex, what do you think?
I mean, any more data we can get that is reliable would always be great. Maybe you can't use it and it's not very useful for the subjective part where you say, okay, this is the internal resolution, but the actual image quality is X, Y, Z. Like, the correlation isn't always as high, and the information isn't always super useful. But ex post facto, you can use that information to do really cool like PC comparisons. You can just use it in the advent of the era of PSSR, you could do greater comparisons between FSR and PSSR, between the different versions when Microsoft has their own scaler at some point. It all has this, this great level of utility, presuming it is really accurate and doesn't require a whole lot of manual labor. For me, the accuracy is the most important part, because I don't want to put anything on the channel that is even, like if you have a graph on the screen, it's very different than saying this is what it looks like, because the graph looks like wholly objective data for each frame. And if it's wrong, then it doesn't look right. And then people can run away with it and say things that you don't want them to be saying. So it'd have to be pretty foolproof. And I think the end foolproofing of it would be like looking at a game with DLSS and DRS. And in those, with games with DLSS and DRS, you can run the developer version of DLSS and it'll tell you in real time per frame what the actual internal resolution is. Or you can do that in like something like a game like Doom Eternal, which will also do the same thing for you with their own graphing statistics. And in which case, if it could line that up with DLSS, like, and show you the real internal resolution 1-to-1, different content, then I think that'd be the ultimate test, because DLSS is the most effective, the best. If it could show what DLSS is, then this thing is great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really interesting stuff. I guess you're right though, Alex, because when it comes to putting performance data out there, I have a really simple sort of axiom, which is that if something looks wrong, it probably is wrong. Right. So you need to go in there and manually check that it is actually correct data. The last time I did this was actually for the 8K footage that I supplied you for Gran Turismo 7, where, all we had, here's the thing. We've got this 8K mode on PlayStation 5 Pro that's impossible to capture because display stream compression is used on the output. And we've kind of found a way around it by using the PlayStation 5's internal media recorder, which downsamples it to 4K 60 But the results are certainly in line with what I see on the screen. But, we are talking about an incredibly compressed stream, and you've kind of got to go through and make sure that when a frame drop is indicated as a frame drop, it actually is a frame drop. And if it's not, then you're kind of doing a disservice to the audience, because you're putting out false data essentially. Sometimes mistakes happen, of course, and you can't help that. But you've got to have some sort of part of your workflow that is verification. And I think that's part of the issue we see with a lot of people using the open source FPS analysis tools like Teardrop, where there is no verification system in there as far as I can see. We have tools that enable us to go through step by step, and it literally says this is a duplicate frame, this isn't a duplicate frame, this is a torn frame, and here's where the tear is. Teardrop doesn't have any of that stuff as far as I'm aware. So verification is really, really important. But what can I say? I really want to laud what Brazil Pixel has done here, because we've talked about this DCT workflow several times internally. It's always good to have this data to hand. The question is, the extent to which this sort of emergent workflow is fully accurate, and whether we should be using it, and whether just generally it's kind of like whether we are now in this sort of post-resolution world where it doesn't really matter. I'd say that it probably does when you get to really low resolutions. The further you go up the resolution chain, the less important the internal resolution is. But when we are talking about some games that are running on PS5 at like 640p, that is presenting issues where you're seeing something that looks bad and you kind of want to know why.
Yep.
And this kind of workflow could be really, really useful there. So I just wanted to highlight this channel because it's not often that we see people doing really interesting stuff that we haven't seen before in console analysis, and yet here we are. And this guy deserves kudos, right? This is really, really good work. Do check it out.
Mm-hmm.
Brazil Pixel. Like, subscribe.
Hit that like.
Ring the bell.
Ring that bell.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Okay then, supporter Q&A. This is the part of the show where every week I post on our Patreon saying, hey, got some questions for DF Direct Weekly, or indeed some topic suggestions. Post them here. And in terms of questions, we choose the ones that we're best equipped to answer. And we're going to kick off with this one from Gimme More Frame Rate. Hi gents, last week you had a supporter question in regards to Unreal Engine 5 fatigue. This week we got the news that CD Projekt Red's next big Witcher game is now in full production. They abandoned the Red engine in favour of Unreal Engine 5 and supposedly have a very close technology partnership with Epic Games. Are you concerned about the open world performance of Unreal for this project, or are you actually optimistic that CD Projekt Red is going to help fixing Unreal's open world performance issues? Now Alex, we've discussed this before on the channel many times, but with The Witcher going into full production, these questions are emerging. And I think it's fair to say that CD Projekt Red are well aware of the issues and are looking to address them, right?
There was a presentation at Unreal Fest in Prague this year by Jaroslav Rudsky. Excuse me if I said that incorrectly. Called "How Small Open Doors Can Lead to Better CPU Utilization in Bigger Games." And the entire purpose of the presentation, this person works at CD Projekt Red and as an engineer, primarily on the CPU side of things, how they've noticed in their games in the past, and also specifically using Unreal Engine. And a huge part of this talk was like, when you move around in an Unreal Engine game, the frame times get bad. The bigger the world, the more unique actors, the more actors, that just gets worse and worse and worse. And the whole point of the presentation was to say, we need to rethink how we do things in Unreal Engine, make specific new representations for actors, change the way we stream, a whole bunch of stuff to get these big frame time issues to not occur. And that was like the ground laying work, I think, for what they're going to be doing in the next Witcher game or any game thereafter. The examples in there are using like stock assets, but all the principles apply to any sort of open world game. And so I think CD Projekt Red, they made very smooth, very dense open world game on a PC, not on Xbox One or PS4. In Cyberpunk 2077, and I think they want to continue that. They're known for being really masters of technology in their own way, and I think they want to continue that, especially now that they have all this money, right? They made so much money with The Witcher 3 and Cyberpunk 2077, and they can invest that, and part of that is making Unreal Engine 5 better for their games. Now, will that make Unreal Engine 5 games better in general? I am a little bit more skeptical of that. There will be changes that CD Projekt Red will bring into the main GitHub that will be adapted, but some of the things they're going to be doing are 100% game specific. That a developer for their own game would have to roll their own way of doing that. That will not be generalized into Unreal Engine, in which case it's all up to the developer at that point making it. So I think CD Projekt Red will do something really good. They'll do it way better than almost everyone else using the engine, maybe excluding the Coalition. But yeah, I'm not as worried anymore, but I'm still worried for Unreal Engine 5 completely. Yeah.
This is a partnership between Epic and CDPR. So one would hope that if there is basically what you might call a fix for an outstanding issue that's affecting a lot of games, that this would actually be implemented into the main engine, right? You'd hope so. That this seems like basic logic, but I guess the question is the extent to which it is actually tied to that specific game, right? That's the main issue here.
And there's also like things like inertia. I got a wonderful message this morning from someone showing me a GitHub change to UE, where it said add support for PSO pre-caching of dynamic ray tracing geometry compute shaders. Ray trace. This is a new commit to UE5, and this is. The engine has had ray tracing in it since 2018, and we're only seeing a commit for that now. These things take a long time, apparently, especially for someone as big, and they cover like automotive, they cover VisArc, they cover all these things that have nothing to do with games. And so some things that maybe should be in games won't be there for like 4 to 5 years at a time. So
yeah, there's an example I can cite as well, Alex, which is that when I checked out Fortnite running on the Steam Deck, software Lumen didn't work. It just did not function. You had to engage hardware Lumen in order to get Lumen at all, seemingly. And that was a bit weird. And it turns out that it doesn't just apply to Steam Deck running under Windows. It applies to any AMD APU up to this day, even. And it still hasn't been fixed. And the problem there, of course, is that, a lot of games are shipping without hardware Lumen support, which means there's no Lumen. And there were some very stark examples sent my way, which, the lighting's just absent.
Right.
And I was actually just trying to run Black Myth Wukong on this, on that little Strix Point mini PC. And it's just there's just like big light glare and literally nothing happening in that initial intro scene. And it turns out that software Lumen just doesn't work with integrated graphics where there isn't discrete VRAM pools. And there is actually a fix on GitHub somewhere. But, this should be integrated into the full engine. I mean, I've tried to alert AMD about it, and now I've said, look at this thing on GitHub. But yeah, this was actually brought to my attention by a user. And, they've been tracking this issue for some time. But it's just remarkable that, when the Fortnite issue came to light, we get a lot of people watching our videos, but nobody thought to say, well, why is that happening? I guess maybe there was just the perception that it was possibly a driver issue with Steam Deck because, Windows isn't really supposed to run on it.
Right.
But it's actually persisted into ROG Ally and basically all of those Windows handhelds. And I'm assuming it will persist into any kind of AMD APU laptop. So hopefully that will be fixed.
Yeah. There's another bug too. Apparently, sorry to just talk about bugs in Unreal, but this may be driver related on the AMD side, but apparently Lumen Resolve is worse on AMD than NVIDIA due to a driver bug introduced in I think midsummer or something like that. And it's still that way today. Where you'll see a lot more sparkle between the two competitor cards, like if you were to put an NVIDIA and an AMD one. And this was sent to me by a developer using Unreal Engine because they were trying to get some awareness out there, both to Unreal and AMD side, that this is an issue that still exists. So, yeah, these things take a long time, apparently.
Okay. Let's move on to this question. This question comes from Richard, not me. Preferably, I like to provide answers, not questions, but, Anyway, there's been a lot of talk about Xbox adding support for other stores on Xbox devices, which could include both a home console and the handheld, with Microsoft seemingly struggling to get mindshare on Windows for its game distribution platform over Steam. Is there a risk that such a move benefits Valve more than it does Microsoft? Surely Microsoft wants to be distributing its own games and third party to ensure it can still maximize profits. However, consumers overwhelmingly have backed Steam when given the option. Will Microsoft need to try to enter a revenue share to make this work? Or how else do they maximize their commercials? Is there likely to be enough margins on the software and maybe hardware that handing over a percentage of sales to Valve still makes the endeavor worthwhile? This seems particularly noteworthy when margins on console hardware tend to be low or non-existent, and revenue from software sales and distribution making up the gap. John, this is an interesting one, right? Because we've had these indications from Phil that they're going to allow competitor stores to run on Xbox hardware. And there is not really any sort of idea why they're doing that, other than the fact that PlayStation software will never come to Xbox hardware. But that seems like a rather extreme way of tackling that. I'm curious as to what the strategy is here. All I can think from my perspective is that they're looking forward to a future where closed marketplaces on dedicated hardware are no longer allowed by the likes of the EU and whatnot. We're seeing a lot of movement in digital markets where Apple are being forced, and indeed Google are being forced to open up their devices to other marketplaces. But it does seem slightly odd that Microsoft would want to get ahead of the trend here. What do you think about this?
I mean, fundamentally, I'm sure they would obviously prefer that their users stick to their store and or Game Pass. But if they're really serious about making Xbox a PC and leveraging the PC, they kind of don't have any other choice, right? Like, they could still make it a lockdown platform, but then it would just kind of be the same thing that it was before. Whereas if it is a proper PC experience with options, I suppose that the way I might look at it is, so you look at the Steam Deck, right? You can install other stores on there. There's ways to do it. You can get Windows on there. You have full freedom of a PC, but it's not exactly that convenient to do so, is it? No. Right? Like, Steam is the way to go. I'd imagine on the Xbox device, if depending on how it's put together, dropping out to a desktop and doing something else from there is possible, but perhaps still ultimately less convenient, especially on the go and handheld mode, to the point where users would just sort of naturally gravitate towards using the Xbox store versus that, right? Like, I assume that it would be more along those lines rather than getting into any sort of weird revenue sharing stuff. And I mean, if what we're thinking they might do, which is the idea of like moving away from this specific platform, the idea is that it's just Xbox games are now PC games, and you're no longer crafting specific versions, which means it's not going through the normal checks and the TRC stuff or whatever that we've always seen in consoles. It's a PC version. And it still needs to be open for that platform to really become what a PC is. But like the Steam Deck, there's certainly ways to keep people wanting to stick to whatever software they have proprietarily installed on there.
Right.
I think the other thing, of course, is that Microsoft is going to have all their games on Steam. And maybe you're particularly wedded. Yeah, maybe you're particularly wedded to the Steam ecosystem, but you'd quite like an Xbox piece of hardware. Microsoft will still get their money. They'll get less of it, of course, but ultimately they want to make their platform more inclusive, and their platform isn't just the Xbox app anymore, which is an interesting business strategy. But I think they're looking ahead and looking at what today's younger gamers are doing with their devices, and typically they just, I think Phil has actually said it, they just want to be able to play their games on whatever they've got available. And I guess that would also encompass different storefronts as well.
They'd also have to allow you to install the Sony app, of course.
Oh, yes.
If you want to play the hottest hits from Sony
Right.
on the PC, so you're gonna have that layers there. There's layers.
Yeah, how many
so you can earn
layers?
trophies on your Xbox.
Yeah, I must admit the concept of having, launcher hell on a console isn't particularly great, is it? Alex, what do you think about this? I mean, generally, do you welcome this idea of Xbox and becoming a part of what is essentially the PC ecosystem, assuming they can actually make a decent app?
I mean, because I would love the beneficial aspects of what that could bring to the PC ecosystem, a greater level of standardization for quality, because I don't think it would be just as Wild West. I don't think so. I think there would be a bit more of Microsoft creating profiles for games and things like that. There's going to be something different about it that makes it more intuitive. It'll be changing of UI, UX. I also think it'll make PC gaming better then, because you're going to have to solve some fundamental issues there to get games running well, even on an expensive, I'm presuming the next Xbox is expensive if PS5 Pro is any sort of indication of the way hardware costs are going. They still want it to run better, but without having the benefit of the dedicated QA pass that a console game would get. So they're going to have to work on that, and all these things I think are only positive. Regarding the stores, like you said, Rich, I think if someone's buying an Xbox, they're already going to be making now profit off the box anyway, which is what they're happy with. And the icing on the cake will be if the user, like John says, realizes that the user experience is much faster, ergonomic, and all these things to just keep within the Microsoft ecosystem. I don't think Microsoft's going to do the Apple thing where they make it like actively user hostile to start using other services. But I think they would just make it would just be like in some sort of kind of really not too great PC kind of way of doing things, not something that doesn't lend itself too well to a controller necessarily. Maybe I'm wrong there, but I imagine they would make it not as easy to do as just downloading a game off of Game Pass or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm actually going to skip ahead to a question we were going to do a bit later on, but since we're on the subject of Microsoft, why not? This one comes from Gorguts. Howdy DF Cowboys. Can we address the elephant in the room, please? Windows 11. Windows, right, he's got a list of things here that have happened with Windows. They released a patch 2 years later, which gives a generational uplift to Zen 4 and Zen 5 CPUs.
Ridiculous.
The latest version reduces performance on Arrow Lake. Not sure whether that's true or not. But
I think that's a hub testing, and it is true.
Right. Okay, cool. The latest version of Windows also causes Ubisoft games to crash. That is objectively true. Why is the current state of Windows 11 causing so many issues with newer CPU releases? Is Microsoft to fault, or is it Intel/AMD? Is Windows the new Unreal?
I think Unreal.
There have been issues, haven't there, Alex? There have been issues here, and as I understand it, the latest update to Windows is actually doing quite a lot of changes, which is causing the whole Ubisoft problem. But yes, I mean, there are issues, aren't there? There's weirdness happening with Windows.
Yeah, I actually do think there is actually a problem with testing. The revisions that we see to Copilot, I think, are also evidence of that, where they're realizing, like, through testing and through just exposing it to more users, that they're not testing things thoroughly, or they're not thinking things through thoroughly, so that they have to call it back. And I think this has happened a number of times, but the Zen performance, as well as the regressions with Arrow Lake, really make me wonder how much they are benchmarking things, just benchmarking things between versions, because these are issues that cut through the noise. You shouldn't expect 3 to 5% sometimes difference across versions, just for randomness. I would say it's nothing too awful, but those differences that we saw were measurable, were a lot higher than that. So yeah, I think Windows does actually have a QA managerial something. I don't want to say the QA testers are wrong or something like that. They probably work crazy hours and do things that they don't want to do. But the decision to put it out and then whatever they're doing in the testing process is not right. I also think there's changes now to the way multiplane overlays work in Windows 11, which is breaking some stuff. So it's not just CPU performance. That's a GPU related thing. So these things keep happening. I'm not a fan of Windows 11 anymore, in spite of how much better it is at doing certain tasks. I really want Microsoft to make me pay them 250 to 300 euros to get a version of Windows that doesn't have any AI in it and is connected to the internet just for updates. Like, basically, I want Windows XP back. I don't like the way Windows is evolving currently, especially from like a performance usability standpoint. That so many things are so slow now. Just I click on like the equivalent of my computer to go to my series of folders, but then because it's connected to like their cloud service of trying to store my stuff online that I don't use and I don't turn off, because I try and keep my Windows a default for testing purposes so I can expose issues to default Windows. Then it takes like 1.5 seconds on like a modern NVMe to show like some new folder for some reason. What is that about? Like, that's like Windows 98 is probably better at that kind of thing. Like, I don't know. I find it embarrassing all the time. But John also probably has stories. John, do you have any stories?
Oh, man. I mean, nothing that comes to mind right off the top of my head other than the fact that it does seem like things will be fine for a while on your PC, and then all of a sudden updates hit, something changes, and then, oh no, this thing's crashing now, or this thing's behaving weird. And I mean, I feel like this is more frustrating lately than it's ever been. You know, like I still dabble and use retro PCs often, and I'm always amazed. Like when you boot up a Windows 98 PC with period appropriate hardware, it's kind of nuts just how fast and responsive it is right away. You know, and it just makes me think of how resources are probably not being used as well as they could in a lot of modern software. Like just things are so RAM hungry and inefficient. They don't make great use of CPUs today. There's so much more that could be done faster, I'd imagine. But like at this point, it's so big and complex. Like changing things is inherently very, very difficult, I'd imagine. So I don't know. That said, I will say, I actually, on the positive side of Windows 11, I actually think the HDR is actually in a good spot. Finally, with Windows 11, I've had mostly good luck outside of a couple random games like Stalker 2 being weird about its HDR, wanting exclusive full screen. But I actually was able to map like the HDR toggle button to one of the G buttons on my Logitech keyboard. And you just tap it and it switches Windows to HDR. Tap it again, it goes back to SDR. So anytime I want HDR content, just hit the button and just go. And 9 times out of 10, it just works. And if a game doesn't do HDR, I feel like NVIDIA's RTX HDR or even Auto HDR from Microsoft, which you can't use together, you have to disable one or the other. They're both really good. So I feel like I use HDR on most PC games these days, which is cool. So I will give them credit for that.
Well, you know, I've got an issue with Windows 11. I've got a Samsung 870 Evo 4 terabyte SATA drive, right? This is a really good SATA drive. If I go in to look at one folder, it just says working on it, and it will sit there saying working on it for 10 seconds. The drive itself, if I read or write from it, is perfectly performant. But going into any folder, it's just like an extended pause of working on it. It's just incredibly annoying.
Dude.
Isn't that a thumbnail generation bug within Windows? Is that it? I don't know.
It should be, except that I'm using the detail view. So it should just be producing file names.
It should just be lightning. Oh, I hate that crap.
Yes.
I've had something
the
like
kind
that
of
before.
crazy things happening with Windows. But look, here's the thing, right? Microsoft wants to make Windows 11 seemingly there's some sort of merging between Windows 11 and Xbox. And, you know, if even the basics on Windows 11 are having issues, then is that a good move? You know, there's a lot of, you know, this is even before we get into the whole stutter struggle issue. Because there seems to be foundational problems with Windows that might suggest that rolling it out for consoles or, you know, making PC into a console, if you like, isn't particularly a great idea.
Dude, I just thought of two bugbears though, Alex, that I could share.
Do
that
it.
have been a long time Windows problem. One, server execution error or whatever it's called.
Yes.
I have a lot of MP3s, media files on my system. When you just click and open them, it's usually fine. But like one time out of 10, you try to open one of these files, and this has happened on every PC build for the last like 10 years across all the different Windows. It'll just like not respond, and you're like, what's going on? The media player app, it won't open. It's very unresponsive. And then eventually it pops up server execution error in an old style Windows error box that looks like it's from like Windows Vista error or something. And you just have to click OK, and then it works again. And I never have been able to figure out why it does it on clean installs. It's just a problem with Windows. The other thing that really irks me is the way it handles external hard drives, where I use big external hard drives for backing up and I keep them connected, right? They spin down after a while to conserve
I know where
energy,
you're
whatever,
going with
right?
this, John.
Yeah.
You open up my computer or whatever, or you try to go to one of those drives, Windows just going to be like, all right, I'm going to cross my arms and do nothing until this drive is ready. I'm sorry, you can't use your computer until this drive is ready. We're not going to let anything else happen. It's just like, bam, just
It's
wait.
a blocker. Yeah. It's
classic
You can
example.
still move. Oh, I hate that.
A classic example is the media player, where the internal media player, if I double click on a video that is on one of my SSDs, for some reason it won't play it until it's spooled up the dormant USB drive, which is about like 8 seconds for that process to complete. And then I can watch my video, which is on an SSD. And nothing to do with that external drive. It's just weird issues.
Any application that potentially will look at that external drive, whether or not you're actually looking at it or not, if it's just like an option, it's going to make you wait until the darn thing is spooled up. And I think that is just ridiculous. There's got to be a better way to handle this, to allow other operations to continue until you very directly try to access the file. But then just like, I don't know. It's just, it's bad.
I have another bug that makes me laugh, and I won't solve it because apparently it's not solvable. But on the 7800X3D system, every single time I shut it down, it gives me an error right before I shut it down. And if you Google it, just Google X3D shutdown error, and you'll see hundreds of posts about it. It's like related to some sort of Xbox thing. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
But I get that. And I think actually a lot of people get that.
Wow,
Write a
thousands
comment
of
on this web
comments.
zone if you get that if you get that error too. But yeah, it just makes me laugh. It doesn't actually affect anything, but it's funny just to see a big red error when I try to shut down my PC. Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that we don't particularly like Windows 11.
No. At the end of the day, no.
All right, let's move on. This question comes from 1040 STF. When I see the transformative effects of a PS5 Pro patch on a game such as Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, I guess such a patch for Black Myth Wukong could be a godsend. But I don't think we've heard any news of one. Strange, right? Could the tech troubles of the game be too deep to be saved even by the PS5 Pro? Well, I actually did a video about this back in the day, which kind of presented what Black Myth Wukong could look like given broadly similar GPU performance to the Pro. And, well, I just think, there were 2 points to that video, which was number one, for the console version, I think it was probably their first AAA console game, there were some very odd decisions being made. Like, for example, the 60 FPS performance mode using frame generation. The concept of a performance mode is that it's supposed to be running at 60 frames per second, granted, but it's also supposed to be because you get better input lag, and you don't if you're using frame generation up from 30 frames per second or lower even. So, yeah, I mean, they could have just dropped resolution on that and run it at close to native 60. I think that was one thing. And if you're doing that, then obviously extra GPU power from the Pro means you can have a higher resolution. Then there was that weird balanced mode, which was flat 1080p, capped at 45 frames per second. I mean, you could, in theory, remove that cap with the extra GPU power of the Pro, and it should run at 60. Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, I did a video on it. Check it out. There's just like a combination of weird tech decisions made for the standard PlayStation 5, which they could have handled better. and then you kind of map what they could do if they'd taken those better decisions, and then give it extra GPU power, and generally you get a better experience. So. But I just can't help but think that maybe this is something that's going to happen further on down the road. Seemingly, they've got an Xbox version coming out at some point, which is possibly a higher priority, you'd think. I don't know, John, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, those decisions are weird for sure, and I think they could improve it on the Pro. But like, I was surprised at how not sensitive people are to this. I commented that I was surprised to see people that played it on PS5 think so highly of it due to some of these issues. People were like, "What problems? Perfect, best game ever. Runs like a dream." I was like, "Well, frame generating from 30 to 60, like you can feel it. It's extremely laggy. Like, it feels perfect to me." I'm like, so like at this point, I'm like, I don't even know what to say. Like, people are very unsensitive to input lag more than I expected, and when you see those responses, you can see why a developer might just do it. But what I'd like to see is if they could implement TSR and just a solid 60 FPS mode. I actually don't know I don't remember what they're doing. Is it FSR or TSR?
I think we decided on, what did we decide on?
I think it was FSR because of the frame generation requirement.
Yes.
But we don't really know for sure. We'd have to do a much closer analysis. But I think we settled on FSR back in the day when we first saw it.
If they could do a TSR mode that is as good a quality as they can get visually while still hitting 60 on the Pro, I think it would be perfectly awesome and solid. Because right now it's like, either if you want 60, you got a ton of input lag, and then the other modes just look kind of choppy and weird. Like, they couldn't even, if they had done like a 49 FPS VRR mode or something, or a 50 FPS VR mode, then I would more get that weird balanced one. But 45, like, to me, if you do, go ahead.
Sorry, I think the actual quality mode, which generally operates in a kind of 30 FPS to 35 FPS no man's land, I think that actually caps at 45 as well. Based on mine, looking at the intro and looking at skies and whatnot.
I don't understand it though. Like, when you see that, you're like, what are these? Like, somebody didn't understand like the way displays work and the way the PS5 works in terms of how frames are presented. That's such an arbitrary. The only other time I feel like we've seen this was at that original Arkham remastered thing that was released, where they tried to bring it to UE4.
Arkham Asylum.
That, which was also awful. So I'm baffled by these decisions. I don't get it, and I hope that they do tackle the Pro and deliver a better version.
Yeah, I think they could do like 1440p DRS, TSR, 60 FPS, reasonable settings. That seems like
that'd be great.
A really good goal for a 60 FPS mode.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we'll see something happen with Black Myth. I still haven't had time to properly play it, but I would prefer it to actually have a mode that's good. Because it's just not great at the moment.
Well, you got to play it on PC though. That's the way.
It's a bit better.
That's the thing, right? That's actually a good point, because it does actually. It doesn't actually seem to be that heavy on the CPU based on what I've seen.
No.
It should be able to. I mean, typically there's a reason on console where you can't lock to 60 frames per second. Graphics are scalable, CPU less scalable. But if the CPU is fine, then, it's just a question of scaling on the graphics side. And if you're adding 45 FPS caps, that's just kind of weird. Anyway, let's move on. This question comes from Gordon Lin. How does Nintendo avoid, for the most part, day one jank on their releases? How do you think they will maintain this quality for the technical demands of their next generation? Well, this is an interesting question, isn't it? Because typically they do produce some really good stuff that just works well on day one, but maybe it's because they're working with more third-party studios, but there are issues that are starting to crop in even into first-party releases now. John, I guess there's two parts to this question. How do they avoid, for the most part, day one jank, and are the standards slipping?
I don't actually really have an answer to how they do it. I assume it's just very, very thorough testing and a lot of care put into it. they're spending more money and time ensuring that the games are as polished as they can be, and they're making solid technical decisions both early and late in the project to sort of meet those goals. They always kind of keep themselves constrained just enough to sort of deliver something reasonable. They're not reaching for the stars. I'd say the closest they have to a game that has a bit of jank and some issues is the recent Zelda games. And I think it's pretty impressive that they shipped as polished as they did, considering how ambitious they are in terms of like, they're trying to do physics interactions and like very dynamic things that most games don't attempt these days. And yet they're still pretty polished overall,
right?
With minimal jank. For that style of game, the jank is acceptable. But in terms of slipping, I think when it comes to third-party partners that they're working with to develop games, they've traditionally done very well. Like you look at what happened with, say, like Mercury Steam, how they managed to whip them into making like Metroid Dread, like a really smooth, beautiful 60 FPS game when that was a developer known for, like, you remember the Castlevania, the first one, Lords of Shadow, they did on the PS3 and 360. That was pretty much a 25 FPS game at best. It was kind of a mess on those machines. That was their background, bad performance under Konami. Nintendo clearly helped them. But then you look at stuff like that recent Mario and Luigi thing.
Brothership.
Which it's not good. It's really not good. Acquire did the heavy lifting on that, but the technical performance is bad. I would say there's not too many of those examples right now, but it definitely does seem to happen once in a while. And that is a bit of a bummer.
I think the avoiding, for the most part, the jank is simply that they have a lot of time to polish. I think it's really that simple. And I think it's a crucial part of development that they're investing in and a lot of people aren't. There does, we've talked about it at length in directs where there just seems to be a case of we've run out of time, we need to ship it. Let's get it out the door.
That's really interesting and important, Rich, because this has allowed Nintendo to take a different approach. Like, let's say you look at like a typical big AAA Western game from a lot of companies, not all, but there's a decent amount of times where a game comes out, full price, the launch version is quite broken. And then over the next however many months, they polish it up. But by then, it has this reputation, and then the price drops and you're getting like sales for like 20 or $30. And then people might consider it, but all of this stuff sort of muddies the waters. People don't want to spend the full price on day one because of the bugs, and then it creates this bad reputation, and then it's on sale, and then any sales that happen after that point tend to be at a lower price. Nintendo ensures that when they release their games, the quality is high enough that buyers generally feel very comfortable and confident in buying on day one. And this is furthered by the fact that they don't really do many price drops or sales. So they've managed to maintain the sort of like value proposition for their software in a way where it's like, it's going to be good on day one, usually. And you can't just say, well, I'll just wait, 3 months and get it on sale, because that ain't happening. And so they've kind of built a different relationship with their customer than a lot of these other big developers have, that makes it more, I guess, it sort of pays off in that regard. So to me, it kind of says that extra time and money they spend on ensuring that their stuff is polished is absolutely worth it. And it's built that relationship over the years that gamers have with Nintendo that they don't have with a lot of these other publishers that are known for these problems. And that's with the rising costs of game development. This really has to change, I think. If companies need to build new relationships with the audience, be like, hey, we can do really polished, complete games right away.
Yeah. So, Alex, in the PC space, you live in a dark and dank world where if a game comes along and it's actually a polished experience on day one, it's like a revelation. Yeah. It's like God rays piercing through the dark
like
clouds.
with Veilguard, a game where I was like, on the game, I'm like, I don't like Dragon Age anyways that much. But then I was like, oh, but it doesn't run like junk. I get all super excited about it and I make a glowing video. Yeah, it's completely different landscape. Just the standards and the expectations. Well, I don't even know about expectations. I don't know. I feel like PC gamers can be sometimes a lot more demanding in some aspects. So yeah, it's really about the standards of publishing are way different on PC. It's always kind of the redheaded stepchild, or I think it was once described, like they keep it on, like they keep the PC version on CPR until like the last couple weeks when they resuscitate it. I like that. Yeah. But yeah, completely different. I wish we got the equivalent of Mario polish. The equivalent of Mario polish on PC is probably like an id game, like Doom Eternal.
Yeah, right.
Doom.
Yeah,
That's like really about it, usually.
Well, you've got Indiana Jones coming up next.
That'll probably be great, I imagine. I hope. I hope.
It would probably be acceptable in terms of polish. Who knows? Okay, let's move on. This is the final question of the show. Tyrus1235 writes, with all the talk of the PlayStation 5 Pro lately has made me think about the consoles of yesteryear. What would a theoretical PlayStation 3 Pro look like? I'll tell you what, Chad Warden would have loved it. That's all I can say. Could Sony in the years between PS3 and PS4 manage to quote unquote upgrade the cell processor somehow? Well, I don't. Yeah, that's not really. It is an issue, but I think ultimately one of the main reasons that the PS3 had issues is that the GPU just wasn't good enough, and I guess that would have been something they could have looked at. I guess the issue there is that obviously, you'd think to yourself, well, they've got an NVIDIA graphics chip, they could just go to G80 and, it would be a completely game-changing upgrade for a Pro console. But then I guess you'd be looking at things which we suspect it holds back the PlayStation 5 Pro to a certain extent where, the shader code would be completely different.
Right.
Which is probably why we've got a 16.7 teraflop GPU that's likely sort of existing RDNA rather than brand spanking new RDNA. That's unconfirmed, but I suspect that would be the main reason that would hold back a PlayStation 3 Pro from just using a much better GPU. So they'd have to actually use the same older technology, and that probably isn't great either.
Yeah, just like they would double the shader engines, pixel shaders, vertex shaders, like because it was already kind of a stripped down version of, what was it, G70 at that point?
Yeah, it would be. Yeah, it would be.
They could have done that. I think the big thing for the PS3 also would have been increasing the split memory, because they had memory issues on PS3 as well. Like just doubling those respectively would be probably a big deal. Increasing memory bandwidth would also in those. I swear everything like for those systems, like Xbox 360 was better, but it was still so constrained in many ways. Just even like increasing bandwidth on the GPU would make a lot of games run more closely to 30.
Absolutely.
I think so.
What would you want from a PS3 Pro, John?
I would want them to have worked with NVIDIA to find some way to make G80 compatible. Yes.
G80 is so good. Yeah.
Because, I mean, they were so freaking close to it, though, right? Like, if it had just been based on G80, like the RSX.
It would have been...
game-changing,
nightmarish for Microsoft if they'd had G80 for sure.
Dude,
yeah,
that's true. It would have changed. It would have changed the direction of the industry in a weird way, I'm sure. But it would have been a much, much, much better system. Like
the funny thing is, of course, is that the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 era, there were so many die shrinks that there was actually much more of a viability.
Profile
to having a Pro console. They went from like 90 nanometer to like 28, I think, for the RSX from the beginning of the generation to the end. And that's like a gigantic leap in processor technology. So absolutely, they could have done a Pro console. They could have delivered something that was far, far superior to the originals. I think it was also like a different world at the time, though. There was the big economic crisis of 2008, 2009 onwards. And so there probably
like today
wasn't
any better, though.
Well, yeah. I was going to say, the $700 console, but there was a $600 console in 2006.
Yeah.
Which is kind of crazy. So yeah, I think they probably would have left the cell as is, maybe with a clock speed bump. They probably could have got away with that. They could have unlocked the 8th SPU because the yield issues would have improved. They could have made a much bigger GPU, but they probably wouldn't have been able to do G80. I just don't think the concept of a pro console was actually on anyone's mind at that time. The basic idea is that a console was a fixed platform that you stick with for, however many years. And that's it. But, obviously things have changed now. But that's what they could have done. The 360 side of things, probably quite similar, right? Extra memory, bigger GPU, faster clocks. But they actually did a lot of great work on the 360. They actually unified the CPU and GPU into a single piece of silicon, which Sony never did with Cell and RSX. So, they did a lot of efficiency savings on 360.
Well, they had a lot of work to do there to save it from red ringing.
Gotta make it work, not explode.
Although the PS3 obviously has major issues as well with the RSX dying. And then you get the yellow light of death.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
Crazy stuff. But yeah, that's what a theoretical PS3 Pro would have looked like. Bigger GPU, more memory, faster clocks. And I think it would have been pretty sweet, but alas, it needed not to be.
Dude, we needed it though more than ever. Games were so bad in terms of performance that generation. Like
there was, yeah, you're quite right. They could have easily done a better model to solve a lot of these issues. Yeah, for sure.
I mean, people still complain about performance today, but I'm like, my dude, if you actually look at the landscape of console games right now, most are actually 60 FPS. Performance is the best it's been in like 2 decades in the console space. It's actually very good overall. The PS3 generation was one of the worst. It was so bad. If you go back to those titles, like I literally laughed out loud when I booted up the 2010 Medal of Honor reboot on the PS3 some years ago, and I'm like, the whole intro scene is like 15 to 25 FPS with like gigantic full screen tearing everywhere, and I'm like, this is what they considered a AAA in 2010.
Is that the one with the dude bro?
It's
beard
so
guys
dude bro.
They throw a guy on a chair and he explodes through a door. I remember this intro. I think
it's straight up pathetic, I would say. When you look at that games like that, and there was a lot that run that bad and look the way they do, and you're like, this is garbage. This was so bad. Like, we've come a long way from that. So things may not be perfect now. There's definitely issues, but like, that was a very dark time. And I would say the PS2 era largely holds up better in many ways. Like, there's good performing stuff on the PS3 and 360, but there's a lot of bad stuff there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's funny because we look back at there's kind of like a bit of revisionism going on with the PS3, where it's like obviously the 360 was the better multi-platform machine, but then there is this narrative emerging that it actually got better across the generation, and by the end they were pretty much the same. And whenever we go back and look, it's just not true. The PS3's always behind.
The exclusive PS3 stuff or stuff made for PS3 did get quite good in the end, I would say. But like the multi-platform stuff, no freaking way. Unreal Engine never was good on PS3. It was always like a dog.
Fair enough. Okay, well, that is the final question, therefore, the end of the show. So please do like, subscribe, share if you enjoyed it. Ring bells for things that may or may not happen. I'm asking you that because apparently it helps our algorithm. It really is that simple. Store.digitalfoundry.net for our merchandising wares and for the Black Friday sale there. Everything must go, as they say. DF supporter program. Join us. Early access opportunities, the chance to help shape DF Direct Weekly, early access to DF Direct Weekly every single week, and a lot more besides. Our Discord's amazing, by the way. But that's all from us on this one. Thanks for watching and supporting Digital Foundry, and inevitably we shall see you next week.